Well, Paul is not my favorite biblical character. It might be because he's the one I am most like, or maybe not. But there is something he says in the book of Romans that resonated with me from the very first time I heard of it. In chapter 7, he says things like, "What I don't understand about myself is that I decide one way, but then I act another, doing things I absolutely despise. I decide to do good, but then I don't really do it. I decide not to do bad, but then I do it anyway. My decisions, such as they are, don't result in actions. Something deep within me sabotages my best intentions and gets the better of me every time." Can you relate to that? Do you ever tell yourself that you're going to get up at a certain time, but then there you are in bed having pushed the snooze alarm a lot of times? Do you ever decide to resolve a conflict in your life, but then somehow you just can't make the approach? Do you ever plan to reach out to someone and find weeks later you still haven't done it? Do you ever resolve to keep quiet and then find yourself dominating the conversation anyway? One of the keys to making changes in our lives is knowing ourselves, knowing why it is we do what we do. And that often feels like a mystery to us. That's why we begin this Lenten season as a journey towards self-knowledge, with a goal of getting out of our own way a little more, to allow ourselves to be and become the people God created us to be. So one of the tools that I have come to find very useful in this regard is something called the Enneagram. If you can see the lines and the numbers behind me, that's the Enneagram, although we're not going to get into the lines and the shapes today. But in my experience, there is nothing quite like this Enneagram for explaining human behavior, although it's not actually about behavior at all. It's about how you see and inhabit the world. It's not about what you do, but why you do it. In their book, The Road Back to You, Suzanne Stabile and Ian Cron-Morgan introduce the Enneagram this way. It will teach you things about other people that will astound you as you learn to recognize differences between you. It will show you the worst of you and the best of you and help you celebrate the gifts you have. The wisdom of the Enneagram helps those who know it, who understand differences, practice compassion, improve relationships, and find ways of being in the world that add meaning to their lives. So I want to spend a little time with you this Lent doing some Enneagram talk. I've been working with the Enneagram myself for about 30 years. And I'll be drawing heavily this season on the recent writings by Suzanne Stabile, who's kind of my favorite Enneagram go-to person these days. Now, this will not be new for some of you, but each of the numbers on the Enneagram corresponds to a different way of understanding and being in the world. So don't be surprised if you hear someone saying, "I'm a 2," or "I'm a 7." Please try not to say, "You're a 4," or "You're a 9," because you don't really know that. It's not about behavior, but the whys behind behavior. So it can be very unhelpful to be told what you are, it can throw you completely off track. And although it does sometimes take a while to find your place, don't be concerned about that. And a caring guide can sometimes be helpful. Here's the other thing about the Enneagram, and if you're a 7 and you know it, you're not going to be happy to hear me say this. Often your understanding of the Enneagram begins with the worst of you. It exposes vulnerabilities and patterns of behavior that are uncomfortable. All of those things that Paul is struggling with in Romans. What we learn with the Enneagram is that those worst parts are our best parts, and our best parts are our worst parts. And so sometimes it takes those worst parts for us to recognize ourselves in this system. So, for example, let me go through the numbers in the worst and best of them, just to give you a sense of that. For example, ones, because of their desire to be good and perfect, they have this amazing ability to see how things could be better, to make things better. But they can be overly critical of themselves and others. They can set standards that feel impossible to live up to. Twos are amazingly helpful. They can easily sense what people need. They're generous in trying to meet those needs, but they often give too much. They exhaust themselves in the process. They can feel resentful, like they're being taken for granted, even though they're the ones who started helping in the first place. Threes are great at meeting goals and being successful. They can be inspiring leaders and have the desire and ability to be whatever a situation calls for in the moment. However, because they focus on the goal, they sometimes overlook the feelings and the contributions of others. They don't let go, and they find it very hard to trust. Fours engage life with fullness and authenticity. They're the only number on the Enneagram that can bear witness to pain without having to fix it. But fours misunderstand the way others see the world as a lack of interest in them. And so they can seem like they really need to be the center of the tension all the time, or they'll pull away. And sometimes the intensity of their feelings can feel overwhelming to others. Fives at their best are measured and thoughtful and self-sufficient and prepared. They're good listeners. They're great observers. They're capable of not taking things personally. I don't understand that at all. However, they don't tend to share much about themselves with others. It can be hard for them to move to action. They always feel like they need more information. Sixes are steadfast and loyal. They are concerned about the common good. They are the ones who hold groups together, but they are worried all the time. They're often anxious. They're very practiced at seeing the worst case scenario. They're hesitant to trust their own experience and what they have to offer. Sevens are optimistic and upbeat and creative. They bring the joy, they bring the fun. But their fear of being trapped in pain can make them avoid places and situations and conversations. And their fear of doing the same thing over and over and over again makes it hard for them to settle down and actually just complete a project. Eights are dynamic and confident and creative leaders. They take charge. They're unafraid of those in authority. They have a heart for the underdog. But they struggle to understand that vulnerability is not a weakness. So they don't do well with vulnerability in themselves or anyone. They're the ones who are always staying strong. And eights aren't always aware of the intimidating effect they have on other people. Nines at their best are natural mediators. They can see at least two sides. They're peaceful, they're not controlling. But it is as much a problem as it is a gift that they see at least two sides to everything, because it makes them rethink their decisions and just follow the crowd in order to avoid the thing they hate most, which is conflict. They are the best conflict avoiders in the world. So that's the 9. And you can see how it brings together the best and the worst of us. Those 9 numbers are also organized around the 3 centers of intelligence, around thinking and feeling and doing. Generally, we tend to prefer prefer one of those over the others. And generally, we also tend to repress one of those too. And some of us are complicated and tend to repress the one we actually prefer. I'm one of those, so if you are too, we can learn together about that. Now, don't worry, just because you prefer one over the other doesn't mean you can't do them all. We all think, we all feel, we all do. We have the ability to do all of those things. But generally, we prefer one or two of them, and we really don't prefer one of them. So here's some questions to help you think about that. Like, for example, when I encounter a new situation or problem, I'm likely to want to do something, anything, even before I possess all the relevant facts. If so, you might have a preference for doing. Or when I'm anxious and stressed, are people likely to tell me that I'm overreacting emotionally? That might indicate a preference for feeling. Or are people more likely to tell you that you're shutting down emotionally or underreacting emotionally? You might have a preference for thinking. Examining carefully your dominant and default manner of responding to the world in that way can help you sort out which one you prefer. If you prefer the doing center, it might be that you tend to act before thinking. And anger is often waiting just below the surface for you. You might even not think of yourself as angry. You certainly don't always appear as angry, but it's right underneath the surface. I remember an Enneagram 1 telling me he knew he was a 1 when we talked about anger, because he said, I am angry all the time. And people said, no, you're not. We've never seen you angry in your life. He said, oh, I'm angry, but it's all inside. You can't see it because who I'm angry at most is me. For those who are in the heart or the feeling triad, when you encounter something in life, your first reaction is to feel something. And what's right below the surface for you? It's shame. You know what it's like to feel ashamed or worried that people will see the real you. For those in the heart triad, when you encounter life, your first reaction, wait, those in the head triad, did I say heart? If I did, I meant head. Then your first reaction is to think and plan. And you probably overthink things. And why? Because what's underneath the surface for you is fear. You've got fear all the time. You might not call it fear. It might be anxiety. It might be worry. But you know what it is to be afraid most of the time. Now, some of you will know where you fit immediately, given just those brief descriptions. Great. And others of you might feel very confused. That's okay. I know I was the first time. That's part of the discovery process. But focusing on just those simple things of thinking and feeling and doing can really help you narrow down the options. Or help you think about your life. Even if you do nothing more with the Enneagram at all, but you think about this feeling, doing, and thinking thing, it can make a difference to how you approach the world. It might help to notice which of the three you prefer the least. So if you focus more on doing and feeling, and not so much on thinking, you're probably a 1, a 2, or a 6. Oh, I have a handout for this. Let's see if you online can even see that. Can you see that? If you focus more on thinking than feeling, you're maybe a 3 or a 7 or an 8. And if you focus more on thinking and feeling than on doing, you might be a 4, 5, or 9. So basically, if you're not so much with the thinking, you might be a 1, 2, or 6. If you're not so much with the feeling, you might be a 3 or a 7 or an 8. And if you're not so much with the doing, but you're all about the thinking and the feeling, you might be a 4, 5, or 9. And these are patterns that have been well established within us from our youth. We have been responding to life in habitual, predictable ways. And it's something that has worked for us. It's how we've gotten through life. It's how we've coped. So it's also a challenge to change any of those patterns of behavior. And when we begin this journey of Lent every year, the tradition is to hear the story of Jesus and the wilderness temptations. And our tendency is to believe that if we can be like Jesus, we will resist temptation. And all we have to do is work hard enough or have enough willpower. But as Paul notes in Romans, it's not as easy as all that. We can say, I'm not going to do it. And then we do it. Because we don't know why it is we're doing what we're doing. We aren't in touch with those things deep inside that are going to sabotage our best intentions. If we're someone who does not prefer to do, then if our goal is to do something, we're going to have a tough time with it. Our first step on the journey to well-being is to pay attention then to what we're doing and why we're doing it. So, if you're willing, I'd invite you to practice observing yourself without judgment, which is definitely the hardest part. But you see, when we judge ourselves, then we start to defend ourselves, and then we dig into our habits and our patterns more deeply. So that's not going to help anyone. We need to observe our behavior. Just notice what we do. And then we'll have a better chance at noticing why we're doing it. And that, it turns out, is the key to understanding why we do the very thing we don't mean to do. So maybe this week, just focus on those categories of doing and thinking and feeling. Every now and then, just stop and notice. If you already know your number, you know what to look for. You might want to practice something that you can read about in your church newsletter. Take a moment or 3 each day for something called SNAP. Stop. Notice. What am I doing? What am I feeling? What am I thinking? Ask yourself, is there one of those I'm not doing right now? And what am I telling myself? And what am I believing about the world right now? And is it true? And finally, pivot. But be patient with that part. There is a path to transformation should we wish to pursue it. If we are avoiding thinking in the pivot part, we can do that. We can slowly shift our default habits that are no longer working for us and the world that God loves with one or many, 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 many snaps. It is a humbling process. But I think, at least in part, that is what Lent is for. And frankly, something our world could use a lot more of these days. So as we embark on another Lenten journey, may God bless the road we follow. Amen.